I tend to be on the ambitious side, doing things that require a lot of energy, time, and effort. But I'm starting to realize issues with my relationship towards animation. This goes beyond just trying to make quick, easy things and a lot of it, but how it's affected my emotional and mental health. And it made me wonder, can embracing limited and cheap animation help with that? Hey guys, it's Toniko Pantoja, and lately I've been exploring limited, economic, and dare I say, cheap looking animation. After finishing Dusk's Flight, a short that took me years to finish due to me being on and off it for many times, I was a little burned out from independent animation, or full animation that I independently did. When I reflect on it, it was more about my relationship with animation being a little bit burned out. So let me tell you something. For a long time, I wanted to make animation projects that could impress people, to turn heads, to get approval and attention from people that I wanted attention from. Every time I finished one animated project, my next animated project would be much more ambitious, far superior than the previous ones that I finished. This means higher production value, tighter animation, and more substance. I would work harder than the last project. I also thought that every new work that I turned out that was much more ambitious, the higher and beneficial the rewards were. Over time, I didn't enjoy this relationship with my work, and it started to feel dishonest with me. Am I making projects for myself, or am I just making projects so I can turn heads and impress people? Am I self-expressing, or am I trying to make things and express things that people would love? I see amazing dynamic animation all the time being shared, and as much as I wish I could do that, sometimes I have to pull myself back and kind of figure out what I want to do with animation. There's a part of me that still wants to develop ideas for feature, for TV, or for web with stories and characters that people and I can relate to. But I also want to just animate small things like really stupid gags, some really dramatic moments or scenarios that really don't have a beginning or end, or just a vignette of stuff. I also want to explore different looks and different styles and genres with animation. So what I'm trying to say is that animation is an endless medium that you can do a lot with, but at the same time, it's an incredibly laborious process. To make a pretty polished short, it can take several weeks to several months. If you look at my YouTube channel, I usually post proof of concepts or trailers or polished shorts, and again, those things take a lot of time to make. And because you spend a lot of that time into production, sometimes those other skills in writing, in planning, or production management isn't being flexed as much. So let's say I decided I want to spend way more time on writing, on production management, on all the other things that aren't related to flashy animation. And let's say I have a set deadline. And if I want to spend way more time on those other things outside of animation, then that means I have to make compromises for the animation side to work. And when it comes to my work, especially in animation, I do have some sort of standard based on my own ego. Like, I don't want to make it feel unwatchable. When I talk about these compromises, I think about less drawings to the animation, maybe less steps in the pipeline where I'm not jumping between programs and softwares all the time, or eliminating a step in the process entirely, such as coloring. So I could have something that's black and white that's super well animated, or something that's like fully colored and painterly that's very limited in the animation. And if I wanted to just make really dumb shit that's super funny, I could just have really crude drawings or a lot of mistakes and just leave it there on the animation. But one thing for sure is that I need to mix these things up to understand my relationship with animation and what I personally want to do with it without feeling burned out or without hating it. As much as I want to continue to make cool, highly ambitious, highly produced looking shots in my animation work, I think it's time to dial things back so I can see myself more of a storyteller than some idiot that makes decent looking visuals or just gives random advice. So this is why I've been turning to limited animation, and so far it's been several huge lessons for me. So I spent some time making really dumb shorts or really small tests where I'm constantly experimenting with less drawings, less frames, looser drawings, and less steps in my work to get a finished product. And projects where I don't really have to think about on what its overall purpose is or what it needs to be. And by doing some of that, here are some things that I learned. One of the biggest benefits I got from doing multiple economic animation is that it allowed me to understand my pipeline better and to have more experience with other stages, because when I do ambitious and pretty looking animation, I tend to spend way too much time on it, therefore I get really tunnel visioned. And I tend to forget what type, how much, and how long it takes to get a certain amount of work done in other stages of a production outside of the pretty pictures. This then leads to my next point, which is clients, because I get animation clients reaching out to me for a commission or for a project, whether it's a game trailer or a personalized animation. But the problem with that is almost all of these clients zero understanding of what goes behind an animation process or an animation project. They're often surprised by how expensive it can be, how many steps there are, and there's a lot of independent variables, meaning there's stuff that I can't really determine the time, effort, and energy spent on a particular part of a project. I think by focusing on cheap, quick, limited animation, it allows me to see the whole scale of things, and it allows me to get a better understanding of how to communicate with my client step by step of the process, and how to give ideas in what to prioritize, what to leave out, how to budget things, etc. Because when you're only doing like fully ambitious stuff and that's all you know, and suddenly the time is limited, the budget is limited, how do you improvise with that? I remember when I was working with Victoria Ying on the City of Secrets trailer, we did the first few shots fully animated, but we decided, hey, we want to add more exciting parts, so we decided to do that, but we had a limited budget for it. So a lot of the more exciting actiony bits were a lot more experimental, a lot more loose. Probably not as tight as the first shots that I did, but it still turned out really well in my opinion. So when I work with future clients, at least I'll have a variety of different projects with different production qualities. I can show examples of what I can do with a certain budget, with a certain technique, and I think we'll both have a clearer understanding of where the project can go. Another thing that I learned about this is challenging my own ego. So I like to overproduce things and I like to show off. For me, it's either go all out or don't even bother. I remember when I was younger, I was just afraid to put out animation at a lower frame rate, or to have still drawings. And when I reflect back on my older work, there was a lot of shots where it was constant movement no matter what. There wasn't any shot that was just still, or poses that held for a very long time. Things were always moving, things were at a higher frame rate, and things were always fully in between with smooth motion. And maybe I did all of that to distract my audience from seeing the flaws or seeing things that didn't work. When doing limited or economic animation, I gave myself a limited count of how many drawings there were for an in-between, or having much more loose drawings. I had to constantly remind myself to pull back as much as I can, polish a shot and give it more detail and give it more frames. I'm only gonna get tunnel visioned again. And the point of this experience is to open myself to different animation styles, whether the animation is more choppy, more limited, but it also allows me to showcase different things like the filmmaking language, the story, and how people can relate to the project. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is controlling how much energy I put into a project. Like I said, animation is a ridiculously laborious process. There's just so many steps and work to get something done. And it's not just the animation and the art side, it's also management. It's also figuring out the pipeline itself, file management and organization. But it's also a mental and emotional thing where you don't know if this project is the right thing to do, whether it's the right path you're taking, and maybe dealing with some insecurities and anxieties here and there with the project. Whether it's the laborious and physical energy or whether it's the emotional and mental energy when it comes to a project. When I finish an ambitious project, it's both of those energies being completely depleted and I'm super burned out and I'm like, I never want to do this thing ever again for a very long time. And when I'm depleted like that, I get super grumpy, I get really jaded, I hate everything. I need a decent amount of energy to sort of protect myself. So let's say I make a film, it gets a lot of feedback and criticism, and when I'm grumpy, I get super, jumpy and agitated. So I have to be careful with that. And doing more economic and limited animation is going to teach me how to control my energy, whether it's keeping myself in a stable mindset or finishing a project where I'm not super burned out. I realized that finding ways to work smarter or find cheating methods also takes time and energy, because you want the thing to work and you want the thing to look good. There's a standard, but for it to look good, it needs to be explored even further. So sometimes I would make one-off projects where I force myself to try out a new method or a new technique, or to learn an entirely new tool that allows me to find cheating and working smarter methods. So this probably involves drawing my drawing style just a bit so it still looks appealing regardless of its economic style and animation, as well as learning more about the software that I'm using. There are just so many tools in the software that I didn't know even existed, but now I'm realizing, hey, I can use this for future projects, and now it's going to make my life just a bit easier. Because of all the experimentation with limited animation and exploring a different approach with it, I noticed a significant improvement within my animation work. I'm a lot more straightforward, more blunt, and more decisive with my animation choices, whether it comes from choreography, acting choices, how things should move, how much they should move, when to push and exaggerate things, or when to pull back and when to subdue things. I know that when I do full-on productions where everything is in between, there's a lot of drawings, everything's moving all the time, I realize that it's easy to get lost in the fluff in the visual business, whereas where I have to resort to a budget, economic, and limited animation, I have to work with a few drawings, for example, and how do I make that work? And because of that, it's easier for me to make decisions. And this is super important when the project itself is quite big, because it'll force you to choose what's more important for your project within the given deadline and within the given resources. So if you've noticed that I've been posting really small casual shorts, it's because I've been exploring more with the world of limited animation. And also I'm trying to figure out what my relationship with animation is through more economic and limited animation. It's a medium that I love so much that I don't want to do it where I'm just burned out all the time and everything that I do with it no longer feels honest to me. And I guess it still allows me to appreciate the process of making an animated project. Maybe in another video, I'd like to do a talk about hand-drawn limited animation you could consider that still feels really appealing in the hand-drawn classical animation sensibility without going full force. Interested in learning hand-drawn animation or learning how to finish an animated shot from beginning to end? Have a look at the store where you'll find the complete Introduction to 2D Animation video course, tutorials, and other resources. Learn classical animation approaches, drawing, lectures, techniques, and other process videos. Visit the store through the link in the description below.